Okay, so good afternoon, students. So we almost reached the latter part of the, maybe at the latter point of this particular unit. Hope you remember we started to discuss about computer generations in the previous class. So remember I compared the human generation and computer generation. The thing or the generation which we are going to study is computer generation, but I took the human generation too in order to show a particular similar characteristic, right? So everyone remembers that our generations or our generation have different characteristics. From time to time, we had different characteristics. In fact, nowadays also we have different characteristics. But the origin of us would be a kind of monkey. So from there, things changed. So as I mentioned earlier, some of the characteristics were increased and some of them were decreased, but the main structure of that particular human body or that body structure remains unchanged. Similarly, computers also developed through so many generations. In fact, 5 generations. At the time when computers were introduced, they were very large and they had so many characteristics. But over the years, some of the characteristics which that particular computer had were increased and some of them were decreased. But the structure of the computer remains same, right? So that may be the reason why we have taken both human generation and computer generation. Okay. So we can discuss the characteristics of computers which were increased and which were decreased later. So I think I also mention the generations of computers. We have 5 generations: first generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and fifth generation. These are the names given for the generations. So as I mentioned in the previous class, human generations have different times from time to time. We can't say first human generation or second human generation. We like to give some different names. But when it comes to computer generation, they have the same name, right? First generation, second, like that. Okay, right. So before we continue the computer generations, I must tell you some of the things related to history, some of the, I would say, milestones in the history of computer. So which means we will take some of the major inventions or major incidents taken place in the history of the computer. We cannot take all the things from the beginning because, you know, there are so many devices invented, there are so many technologies introduced. So it is tough to introduce or tough to list all these things, right? But we can point some of the major inventions which were invented in the past, right? So that's why I told you that it's a milestone. So I'm not going to take some different things or new things. Better stick with the book and take all these milestones which are categorized or which are listed in your book, right? So since it's a history, as I mentioned earlier, there is no shortcut for remembering the history, right? So you have to memorize or whatever you do. I don't know what you can do, but remember this can be asked in MCQs. Okay, but that may be the reason, you know, remembering those history things is always tough. So that may be the reason why they have added only few things in terms of history. Yes, it would be, it could be possible to add more history things, right? But they have added only few. It may be for your, memory, right? So let's take some of the history, some of the milestones in the history. So while I'm explaining, I will point out some of the most important histories and some of the least. So you can note it down and study because it is tough to remember all these things. Okay, look here. Look, I could display them in a short format, but I display them in a little bit in detail because I thought that it would be better to understand this histories by referring the tude. So that may be the reason why I have added lengthy paragraphs, it may violate the presentation, because when it comes to presentation, you know, we should display everything as point, but here the point becomes lengthy. The reason is you may refer that to get some idea. So that may be the reason. This is not only for presentation purpose, it may be for your later purposes too. Okay, have a look at that. So first one, maybe the first important milestone in the history of computer is that invention or introduction of abacus. You know what abacus is, right? It's a kind of device used for calculation, especially for addition, right? You can do some other things also. That is the first step taken towards history or towards computers history. So it happened years ago, right? As I display 5,000 years ago, maybe before Christ, right? It happened. So this abacus was introduced by Chinese. Okay, so that is the first one. Even inside of the computer, you know, inside of the computer, data are represented, data are calculated. So they use such ideas, right? When it comes to abacus, you know, there may be numbers which can be represented, right, using ones, zeros, ones, like that. So that idea is very useful for the modern computer too. Okay, so that's the reason why we take abacus first one. So remember this point, abacus was introduced by Chinese around 5,000 years ago. Okay, second, in 1642, this is important, in 1642, there was a French mathematician called Blaise Pascal, right? Blaise Pascal, in short, we can call him as Pascal. So he invented an important machine called Pascaline. I think I didn't mention the name here. Doesn't matter, you can write somewhere. It is called Pascaline. Okay, not Pascaline, we pronounce it as Pascaline. So this machine or this device was invented by Blaise Pascal in 1642. So this is a kind of calculating device. In fact, this is the world's first ever calculation device, right? But it could perform only addition and subtraction. Even though we take it as a calculation device, but it performed only two operations, addition and subtraction. Okay, so remember, right? So I don't want to elaborate anything, just remember the fact. Okay, so I will read it out here. In 1642, Blaise Pascal invented a machine called adding machine, that is Pascaline, adding machine. It could perform both addition and subtraction. This was the world's first ever mathematical machine. Okay, right, that's enough. Then after some time, 1674, right? So maybe few years later, this Pascaline, which was invented by Blaise Pascal, was modified. Because as you could see, there is a limitation in this Pascaline, because it could perform only addition and subtraction. But you know, when it comes to basic arithmetic operations, you know, there may be more than these two. Yes, addition must, subtraction is must, even multiplication, division also basic mathematical operations. So since Pascaline was able to perform only two things, so they wanted to modify that. So this man, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he didn't invented a new machine. What he did was he modified this Pascaline in order to include the remaining two operations. What are the two remaining operations? Division and multiplication. So he modified the Pascaline, right, and introduced or included these two additional features, multiplication and division. So at that time, it became meaningful. Pascaline performed only two. Now it is a little bit advanced. Have you understood? So remember this point. In 1674, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz improved the machine invented by Pascal. With these improvements, the machine was able to perform multiplication and division too. Okay, so that is important. Then These are history, right? Don't expect me to explain more. So I can explain only the functions and the years, or maybe about the persons. Then, right, that is another one. There was a person called Joseph Jacquard, right? Joseph Jacquard. He introduced. Okay, remember, I must tell you one thing here. In the early days, we used a device or maybe an object called punch card. Right? Punch card is a kind of device or kind of object used for input the data to the computer. Later we will discuss, right? In the unit number 2, we can study about punch card. But remember, punch card is a kind of object for send the data to the computer, like mouse, keyboard. We use mouse, keyboards, and other things as input devices now, because they can input something to the computer. But you know, mouse, keyboard were not there in the past, right? Maybe at the time when computers were introduced. So the punch card was the most popular object there, or maybe I can call it as device there. So based on punch card, this Joseph Jacquard didn't invent the punch card, right? Punch card was introduced by Holman Hilarit or someone, right? So that is not in our syllabus, I skip it, right? Holman Hilarit. So he introduced or invented the punch card. But what this Joseph Jacquard did was, he implemented, or he produced a loom, mechanical loom machine. You know, the loom is a kind of machine for preparing or for producing clothing items, right? So the machine which is used for preparing, or manufacturing the cloth item, is called loom. So he introduced a loom machine, mechanical loom machine, which uses punch card system. Have you got the point, right? So this is important. He didn't invent that mechanical loom. He didn't invent the punch card. So he, very first time, he applied this punch card for a mechanical loom in order to operate, right? So that is the function, or that may be the invention of Joseph Jacquard. Okay, so punch card was there for different purposes at that time. Even mechanical loom there, but he joined these two things in order to operate. A French scientist named Joseph Jacquard invented a mechanical loom using punch card system. Okay. Then I hope that next name, right? You know this man, right? Charles Babbage. Who is it? We know him as father of computer, right? So, you know, he didn't invent any computer. So Charles Babbage invented two calculation machines. One is analytical engine, the other one is difference engine. Okay, Charles Babbage invented two machines, or two devices, even we can call engines. First one is named as analytical engine, the other one is difference engine. So both are used, or both were used for, performing calculation, right? You know, at that time when computers were introduced, you didn't have so many needs. So it was limited only for performing calculation. So that's the reason why it gets the name computer, because it can perform computing. Computing means a kind of calculations, right? Okay, so he invented these two engines, analytical and difference engine. So because of his invention, he is named as father of computer, because in that particular, or in those particular devices, he introduced that idea, right? Input, processing, output. Such concept was used very first time in his engines, because even in the modern computers, you can see the inputs are given, the process taken place inside, and as a result of the process, you get the output. That is the modern computer. So the foundation was laid in that particular area. So this man uses this idea, input, process, output, for the very first time. So since this idea leads to the modern computer, this man is called father of computer. Have you got the point, right? So this is important. Charles Babbage invented two machines, analytical engine, difference engine. So he used that input process output concept. So they are very helpful for the modern computers, right? I will take it again. Charles Babbage started to make his analytical engine using punch card system concept. He also used punch card. He is called the father of computing, right? Or father of computer. But remember those two names, analytical engine and difference engine, right? So I didn't include the difference engine here because it wasn't in your book. So I missed it, but remember them. Huh? Analytical engine, difference engine. Okay, right. The next milestone would be this lady. There was a lady called Ada Augusta Lovelace. Look here, the Charles Babbage invented the machines, analytical engine as well as difference engine. But even though he invented, he needed some programs. He needed some software to carry out the works. As you can see nowadays, you can have hardwares like smartphone or computer, but without having a program inside, those hardware components are useless. You cannot take a photo from your mobile phone without having a particular software inside. Have you understood? You cannot listen to a music without having a particular software inside. So hardwares are important, yes. At the same time, you need some programs. So this lady helped Charles Babbage for writing programs. So she wrote programs which can be or which could be run in Charles Babbage machines. Have you understood? So that may be the reason why she was called the first ever computer programmer. Right? Nowadays we have so many programmers whose work is to write programs, to develop softwares. But this may be the initial stage for programming. She wrote the program because Charles Babbage needed them for his machines, analytical and difference engine. Okay, so she can also be called Lady Ada. Right, so we have only few ladies in the history, so so that may be the reason why he is called, or she is called rather, Lady Ada. Okay, remember that. Then, okay, I take this as the last point. In 1944, these years are not matters, right? Don't think that these are important to remember. No need for remembering these years, but of course you have to remember those persons and the invention that they invented. So these are important, but these years are not matters. Even sometimes the years are not, accurate, because some books may say a different year, because this is all about history. So no one can be sure. So that may be the reason why I generally don't pay attention on years, but if you can remember, right? So in 1944, Howard Aiken invented a machine called Mark I, right? Mark I. This can be an automatic sequence controller, or even we can say automatic controlling computing or something. So he invented this machine because the automation takes place at that particular moment, right? We didn't have any automated computing device previously, so he invented that particular so this is the name, look here, automatic sequence control calculator. So this can also be called Mark I. Okay, so Mark I, this is the first automatic sequence, automatic controlling computing, right? This is the picture of Abacus, right? You know such things. So these are the history stuff. Okay. Right. So take it again. So things you should remember are, so look, remember them in very short. You don't need to spend much time in studying. Just remember the point. So abacus was invented by Chinese. That's enough. If you can remember the year before Christ 5000. Second point, that particular man, right? Blaise Pascal. So Blaise Pascal invented a calculating machine called Pascaline. Okay, so that's enough if you can remember the year 1642. Okay, so and also you have to remember the device could perform only 2 operations, addition and subtraction. Okay, then next time around 1674, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz invented, rather not invented, he modified the Pascaline in order to include the remaining 2 operations, multiplication, division. That's enough. Then next one, that Joseph Jacquard invented the loom, mechanical loom machine, which used punch card. Right, that's enough. But remember, punch card wasn't invented by Joseph Jacquard. The next point that you should remember is Charles Babbage. Right, so Charles Babbage invented 2 machines, analytical engine, difference engine. He used that particular concept, right, input, process, output, so which pave the way to the modern computing. So that's the reason why he is called father of computer. Charles Babbage needed programs for his machines. So he got the help of Ada Augusta Lovelace. So Ada Augusta Lovelace wrote programs which are needed by Charles Babbage, right? So she was the first ever computer program. The last one, this Howard Aiken invented the automatic sequence control computer called Mark I. Okay, these are more than enough for you. But as you can clearly see, there may be so many history, milestone missed in this list. We have taken only few things, maybe rather important things, but there may be many. You know, time to time, we have so many devices. All these devices were invented some people, right? So you cannot study all these things. It's very lengthy. Okay, right. So I have taken all these things from your book, right? Nothing different. I use the same because history, when it comes to history, better to stick with the book. No, we can't change the names or maybe a year so it is not good. But if you go through some other website, maybe other books, sometimes years are different. Sometimes there may be some other history related stuff. So we don't want such things. Okay. Right, so we were talking about generations of computers on the other day. So as we discussed, we have 5 generations. Right, look. So before we start discussing the characteristics for each generation, we are going to discuss the characteristics of each generation. Not actually, it may not be a deep discussion. As I mentioned earlier, it is history. So there is nothing to discuss. But I must tell you some of the idea to remember them. Some of, you have to memorize, but maybe some features, some characteristics can be memorized with some shortcuts, so with some understanding. So that is important. Look here. So we already discussed that characteristics were increased and characteristics were decreased. I'm talking about computers' characteristics, right? Some of them were decreased and some of them were increased, right? Now imagine if you are a human being, you have some features, right? Characteristics, maybe the size of the head, or maybe the size of the hand, or maybe your height, right? So maybe your weight. So these are some of the physical appearances, right? Physical characteristics. Similarly, think about a computer. So I hope you have experiences with working computer, right? So you have experiences, at least you have experiences with working with mobile phones too. So, nowadays smartphones are there, they are computers. Smartphones are computers. So you have experiences in working with computers. So can you pick some of the characteristics of computers, some of the features of the computer? You don't need to tell me whether they are in high stage or low stage or middle. I want some characteristic, like, see, I have the height. So I don't want whether I'm tallest or shortest or middle. So I want the height. That is my characteristic. So weight, I have a weight. That is my characteristic. So similarly, can you give me some characteristics for computer? Anybody?
Size.
Okay, size is a characteristic. What else?
The speed.
Yes, speed also one of the characteristics.
Parts of the computer.
Sorry, repeat it.
Portable.
Okay, portable, later discuss. Any others?
Technology.
Sir, accuracy.
Technology, okay. What else?
Storage.
Sir,
Storage
structure.
capacity.
Storage capacity.
Versatility.
Versatility. Okay, look, listen to me. Right, so yes, you are almost spot on, but I will discuss. Right, look here. Yes, computers have size, right? So size must be one of the characteristics. Size, computer size. And you also mentioned about the speed, right? Yes, that is also characteristics. Right, speed is one of the characteristics. And also, right, and also, yes, you talked about capacity. So capacity, storage capacity. Okay, storage capacity is one of the characteristics. And the price, that may be one of the characteristics, right? Sometimes computers were very expensive, sometimes they are not expensive. So that price, that is the characteristic. It may not be a physical, component of physical appearance, but it may be one of the feature of a computer, right? Price. And also, you know that computers consume electricity, right? So power consumption is there because they are electronic devices. They work on electricity, so they consume the electricity. So, sometimes they consume more electricity, sometimes they consume less. So consuming electricity is one of the characteristics. So power consumption. Okay. So power consumption also one of the characteristics. And you should understand this one also. Look, if it is a computer or if it is any electronic device, they always emit some heat, right? They generate some heat. So that heat generation also there. Heat generation. Have you understood? So since it's an electronic device, it has some electronic, components inside. So they all use the electricity. So, the heat emitting is always possible. So that is another characteristic. Okay, right, look, there may be some other characteristics too, but I have taken some of the most important characteristics. You talked about technology. Yes, technology is also one of the feature or characteristic, but I skip it because I feel that these are important for the thing which I'm going to explain. Right, technology may be there, but that may not be important for me at the moment. That's why I skip the technology. Right, look here. So you have these characteristics: size, speed, capacity, price, power consumption, and heat generation. Look, these are the characteristics of computers. Even the present day computers have them. So look back maybe years ago, right, in around 40s, 1940s, computers were there. They also had the characteristics, same characteristics, because they also computers. So now you should understand that these characteristics, all these characteristics were there in the ancient time and also now we have. So now try to understand that these characteristics or some of these characteristics were increased over the computer generation, right? Some of the characteristics were increased over the computer generation. From first generation to second generation, then third, then fourth, then fifth. So when you go from first to fifth, some of these characteristics were gradually increased. And some of these characteristics of computers were gradually decreased. So I hope that you can easily pick them, because this doesn't need any technical explanation or technical description. You may use your, common sense or practical knowledge or common knowledge in order to take that. So tell me, which of these characteristics were increased over the generation?
Speed.
Speed.
Increased, right? Speed increased. What else?
Price.
Price increased.
Price. What else?
Storage capacity.
Storage capacity increased. What else?
Power. Speed.
Heat.
Which one? Heat generation.
Heat.
Right, look, listen. That's why I told you to use your common sense. Look, the technology has been improved over the years. The technology that we had in the first generation was not in the second generation. So in what happened in second generation, definitely the technology was improved, because you are going from one stage to another stage. So definitely technology increased. So now look here, right? Right, look here, the speed of the, you mentioned about speed, right? I label here, not there, it's speed. Okay, look here, speed increment. Yes, definitely speed should be increased, because no one likes to have a slow computer. So everyone wants to have a computer which can run very fast, right? So from time to time, when the technology is developed, right? So definitely those computer scientists try to increase the speed, because speed, having a high speed computer is the preferred one. So definitely it is increased. But think about the size. You know, no one likes to have a big computer, room size computer or large computer. But at the time when computers were introduced around 1940, they couldn't reduce the size because they didn't have enough technology to reduce the size. So they could manage to produce a computer. And that may be the only focus on computer scientists at that particular time. They wanted a computer, that's all. So they developed or they manufactured a computer which took around almost a room, right? So at that time, computers were very large. But now what happened? Technology improved. So when technology is improved, you know, they try to reduce the size. So definitely size is not increased, that is reduced, decreased. Okay. You talked about capacity. You know, we want a computer with high capacity because we wanted to save a lot of things in our computer. No one likes to have a computer with less storage capacity, because if you have less storage capacity, definitely you can save a few things. So this characteristic must be in high, but around 40 at the initial stage, computers didn't have much capacity. The reason is same, technology wasn't developed. But over the years, technology developed, so scientists increased the capacity. So from time to time, from generation to generation, this capacity was increased. This is the one which I talked about earlier. This is your common sense. Think practically, right? No one likes to have a computer with less storage. So definitely they must be increased. So you talked about price. Look here, at the initial stage, technology was very limited, right? So you, as I mentioned earlier, all they want is a computer, right? So they tried hard and manufactured a computer. But remember, even at that particular stage, computers were not commercial. Computers were not at home. Only computers were used for some special purposes. So very expensive computers, right? At that time, have you understood? Technology was limited. You had to manufacture a computer with such limited technology. So it is very, very expensive, right? But over the years, when technology is developed, you know, there may be some reduction in the price. Even you can see now, everyone can buy the computer. Everyone can, right? Because the price is reduced. How? It is the technology development. So when technology is developed, you can easily compare, right? Maybe the mobile phones or computers which you bought 5 years back were very expensive. But now they are available for cheap prices because the reason is technology improvement. Okay, so price must be reduced. Okay, it is not increased, it is reduced. Right. So you talked about heat generation. You mentioned that the heat generation is increased. Look, nobody wants to have computers with high heat generation, because if your computer is generating heat, it means it can be affected. Right. So heat generation, because when a device emits heat, definitely there may be a malfunction inside. So definitely this heat generation must be reduced. But at the time when computers were introduced, there may be so many circuits inside, so many wires inside, they consume a lot of electricity. So heat generation was there. But over the years, they introduced some different mechanisms, they introduced some technologies inside in order to reduce the heat. Still computers are generating heat, right? But the amount is very, very less. So what happened to heat generation? It was reduced. Have you got the idea? Then power consumption, consuming the electricity. So it's very simple, right? So it is also reduced because inevitably you had to have computers at that past with high power consumption. Because as I said earlier, the reason is same. They wanted a computer, right? So they built it. It consumed a lot of electricity because it's too big. It had so many circuits inside, so it consumed electricity. And also it used a particular technology inside. I will explain that later, called vacuum tubes. So that also consumed a lot of electricity. But over the years, they managed to reduce the electricity, right? Consumption of electricity. Now, as you can see, think about our smartphones. Smartphones are computers. How much electricity they consume? Very little, right? They have a small battery, lithium battery inside. So that small battery supplies the electricity for hours, maybe for days, right? So imagine the amount of reduction in electricity. So it's huge, right? So power consumption also reduced. Have you understood? So increment characteristics are speed, capacity. Okay, so these two, you can bring efficiency in the list, right? But these may be important, but the efficiency also increased. Okay, so speed increased, capacity increased, the computer's efficiency increased. The remaining characteristics were decreased. What are they? The size of the computer decreased, the power consumption decreased, price decreased, heat generation decreased. Now you can understand clearly. Look, so all these characteristics, think about the first generation, right? So during the first generation, computers were very large, okay, very large. But what happened when it comes to second generation? So now the size reduced little bit. You can't say that the size was reduced, maybe a little bit reduced in the second generation. So what happened when you go to the third generation? Because you know a generation spans for years, maybe around 5 years, 10 years possible. So from generation 2 to generation 3, again the size further reduced. Have you got the right? That's why I called there is a the reduction is there as a graduate, right? So step by step, that reduction was there. Now look here, speed increased. So in the first generation computers, you know, speed was very slow. Computers were very slow. But what happened when you go to the second generation, speed was increased little bit. But when you go to the third generation, again, it further increased. Like that, now we have fastest computers. Have you got the point? So similarly, if it is capacity, in the first generation, computers had less capacity. But when they move from first generation to second generation, capacity was increased, right? So even you can say the second generation computers had more capacity than first generation. But even in the second generation, you can't say computers had a large amount of capacity. That is not the point, right? They are larger than first generation. Okay, so like that, you can compare all these points. So these are the common characteristics increased and decreased over computer generations. But apart from these characteristics, we have some other special characteristics in all the 5 generations. Have you understood? These are the characteristics which can be common for all the generations. These are available in the first generation, second generation, third, fourth, and fifth. But the thing is, sometimes they increased or sometimes they decreased. But other than these characteristics, we have some unique characteristics which belong to every computer generation. Okay, so let's take them one by one. They are important. They can be asked in exams. Okay, so I'm not going to explain in detail. Let's take the first one. Right, look at the characteristics of first generation computer. So, you know, every computer functions based on a technology. So there may be a technology inside, even you can say there may be a major hardware inside for performing data process. You know what happens inside of a computer, right? We input the data to the computer, process taken place inside, and the output is found. We already discussed previously. So to do such thing, there was a technology, or there is a technology needed. That technology is in the form of vacuum tubes in the first generation. Don't forget, first generation computers were built by using vacuum tubes. It's a kind of hardware. Okay, right. Then, as I mentioned earlier, nowadays we use so many devices for input purpose, output purpose, right? Even in storage, we use pen drives, CDs, we use mouse, keyboards for input purpose. We use monitor, speaker for output purpose. These were not there in the first generation. So they could have punch cards only, right? They managed to have punch card. So punch card is a kind of component used for all these purpose: input purpose, okay, process purpose, output, and storage. Okay. We can study a little bit about punch cards in unit number 2, because in unit number 2 we have to study about devices. There I will explain. But remember now it's a small card, right? We can call as a device 2, used for input, process, output, and storage purpose. Then machine language was used to write programs. Look, machine language. It takes some time if I explain in detail, but at the same time I cannot go without explaining. That is also not good. So I take some time to explain, but not not in depth, but little bit explain. Right? Look here. So you know, computer programs, right? Games, right? Other softwares. All these computer programs are developed or are created by giving instruction to computer. So, you know, when you play a game, it plays for you. It plays according to your mouse movement or according to your keyboard keystrokes. So it goes according to your wish, right? How it's possible that particular game was created by giving some instruction to computer. The particular person who is called programmer, right? The person who created that game is called programmer. So that programmer gave some instruction to computer, right? Listen to me. So those instructions are written in English nowadays. Even though computer cannot understand English, but nowadays the instructions are written in English. But in the past, maybe at the time when computers were introduced, they couldn't use English or other words for writing instruction. They used computer's own language, right? No computer could understand anything if they exist in binary numbers, which means ones and zeros. I repeat it. Computer can understand the data only if they exist in ones and zeros. They don't know about English, they don't know about Tamil or Sinhala or whatever language. They understand only ones and zeros. That is called machine language. So since it is the starting point of computer, the programmers wrote the instructions in ones and zeros. That is called machine language. But writing instructions in ones and zeros was very tough for the programmers. That's why they changed that pattern in the next generations. But in the first generation, they didn't have any option. So they went to take computer's own language. Okay, so that is called machine language. I hope that this introduction is enough about machine language. Okay, so this is machine language. Remember, in machine language, we use ones and zeros for writing the program. Okay, right. Look here, I listed them as other characteristics because these are the characteristics which I talked about just now. So some of them increase. Look here, heat generation, more heat generation, very large, more power consumption, very slow in speed, very expensive, not portable because, you know, if it is portable, you can easily carry them from one place to another. But these are not portable computers. These are very big. Okay, so I hope that you can understand the reason for separating these characteristics. Okay, I separated these characteristics because these are the common characteristics. These are found in all the generation. But the first three characteristics are not common. These are unique characteristics. These first three characteristics not found in the second generation, right? So there may be changes occurred. Okay, right, look here. Now have a look at these characteristics. Have a look at these special characteristics. Heat generation, more heat generation, very large, more power consumption, very slow, very expensive, not portable. Look here, all these characteristics are not in favor to human. Does anybody want to have any of these characteristics? No, all these things against us, right? So having heat generation, very large, more power consumption, so nobody wanted. So we all experience such characteristics. It is because of the main technology. Because during that period, computers were built by using vacuum tubes. So when vacuum tubes was used, we experienced such characteristics. All these characteristics are unwanted. So nobody wants. So scientists thought about this issue. They planned to change the technology. So they realized that the vacuum tube was the main reason for producing such bad characteristics. So they wanted to change the vacuum tube. So when they changed the vacuum tube by another technology, you know, there is a new generation born. Because when technology was changed, you know, you have different characteristics. So something happened, right? Some of the characteristics increased and some of them decreased. So then they named that particular era or particular period as second generation computer. Have you understood? So when they want to stop vacuum tube, they introduce a new technology called transistor. So let's go to the second one, second generation. Okay, before that, in the first generation, there were some computers used. If you can remember at least two names, there might be more than these four, but I listed some of the most important names of computers invented in the first generation. These are names of the computer, right? ENIAC, EDVAC, EDSAC. These are enough. Even UNIVAC also there. These are computer names. Okay, ENIAC, EDVAC, EDSAC, UNIVAC. These are some of the computers invented in the first generation. Okay, right. So now take the second generation. We can move little faster because these are simple. So look here. So they stopped the vacuum tube and started to use transistor. So even I can say vacuum tubes were replaced by transistors. So when vacuum tubes were replaced by transistors, that generation is named or was named as second generation. Okay, right. So yes, punch cards were still there, right? They were used in the second generation too, because mouse and keyboards were not introduced in that particular period. They came later, right? And also they introduced some magnetic disks for storage, right? There's some disks which use magnets for storing the data. Even you can say magnetic tapes or something, magnetic tapes. Then they introduced a language called assembly. What's the language used in first generation? Machine language. What is the issue with machine language? The programmers suffered a lot because programmers were not experienced in working with binaries, ones and zeros. So they wanted to change that. So machine language was replaced by assembly language and high level languages. There are two languages. Assembly language. So in assembly language, they used some small symbols, small words, but we call them as symbols in order to write programs. For example, for addition, they use a small word like ADD. This is called symbol. For subtraction, they use a small word like SUB. So since these are very familiar for us, this language is much better than machine language. But don't think that how computer understand these words, that is a different story. Computers used some translators in order to translate these words into binary. That is not necessary now. There is a complete unit allocated in grade 11 for such programs. We can learn that, right? So now remember, machine language was changed into assembly. So assembly has some small symbols like add, sub, and some other things, right? So this made the programmers comfortable, right? They could easily write the instruction, okay? And also high level languages. In high level languages, they use pure English vocabularies, pure English words. These also seem to be English words, but these are not actually meaningful words. These are some small symbols. But in high level, they use pure English words like print, right? Even begin or end, right? Then. So they use simple English word for writing. Even nowadays also we use high level programming languages. In grade 11 we will learn, right? So high level programming languages and assembly languages were introduced in the second generation, okay? Right, so look at the other characteristics. They are still same, right? Sorry, not same, something happened. Some of them increased and some of them decreased. Look here, I put as less heat generation. Listen to me carefully. Even though I put as less heat generation, it means the heat generation is less than first generation. You can't say less, but for a presentation purpose, I added this phrase less heat generation. But as a student, you should understand less heat generation means it is less than first generation. Still, computers generated more heat, but the amount is reduced. Have you understood? So always compare with first generation. Here, I put it as small in size. No, it's big, right? Computers big, but smaller than first generation. Have you got that right? But for a presentation purpose, I put it as small, but smaller than first generation. But here in second generation also, computers were very large, right? Less power consumption, same story, less power consumption than first generation. Faster, not fastest, faster than first generation. Expensive, right? Yes, maybe even you can say less expensive than first generation, but I put it as expensive because even in second generation also computers were very expensive. So I put it directly. Not portable, right? So yes, it is also not portable because they were very large. Okay. Right. So now even if you take this characteristic in the second generation from here to here, some improvement was there, but that is not expected, that improvement is not expected level, right? So it must be further improved. So they realized that the transistor had to be changed because, you know, computers characteristics were based on the major technology. So since transistor is there, so they had such issues. So they wanted to change transistor. Okay. So then transistors were replaced by integrated circuit, IC, right? Integrated circuit means some circuits are integrated, are got together in as a very small circuit, integrated circuit. Earlier, they were very large, they were scattered. Now those circuits were reduced into a small circuit that is integrated. So now when integrated circuit introduced, you know, definitely the size. Okay, before that, I must show some of the computers used in second generation. IBM 7030, CDC 1604, IBM 7094, these were some. But I don't think that these names are important as first generation. First generation computers were very important because that was the initial stage. So it is reasonable if they ask question about first generation computers in exam. But I don't think that asking the names of second generation computers is good, right? It is not good because, you know, there may be several computers. Nobody wants to remember the names. But for first generation, since it's the initial stage, it is reasonable, right? Remember them. These are not important. Okay. So I put a photograph also for the second generation, right? So as I mentioned earlier, transistors were replaced by IC. So when IC was used, or IC was introduced, there is a significant amount of change in the size, because earlier computers had very large circuits. So now all these circuits are embedded in a small hardware called IC. So definitely the size reduced. Okay, right. We can take the other characteristic later, but take the first one, IC. Right. Here also the mouse keyboard introduced. You know, mouse keyboard are inevitable nowadays. We all use them. They were introduced during the third generation. And magnetic disks were used for storage, right? Even in the previous year also it was there. And high level, I already explained, high level languages were started to use in second generation, but they are in third, even they are in fourth, fifth, right? Now also we have fifth. Sorry, we have high level. So I don't want to explain about high level, right? These languages have simple English words for writing programs. Okay. Operating system introduced. If you know the word operating system, it's okay. Otherwise, leave it. Operating system is a program which is very crucial, which is very important for running a computer. Right? Without an operating system, no computer works. So if your computer is running at the moment, it means there is an important software called operating system running. Right? That operating system was introduced during the third generation. Right? And I have listed some of the other characteristics. Right? They are too simple. Less heat generation. Again, you have to compare with the previous generation. Right? How? Less heat generation than second generation. here you can't compare with the first generation because you need to compare with your immediate previous generation, right? So small in size, which means smaller than second generation. Less power consumption than second generation. Faster than second generation. Less expensive than second generation. Here also computers were very expensive, right? But less than second generation. Okay. So here in third generation, as I mentioned earlier, you had some good characteristics. You had some healthy characteristics, but again, you need to be improved, right? You have some characteristics which need to be improved. So the technology had to be changed, right? So IC had to be changed. So when IC was changed or IC was replaced by another technology, then the new generation born. So IC was replaced by, that is also a kind of IC called LSIC, large scale integrated circuit, right? LSIC, large scale integrated circuit. Sometimes that is called very large scale integrated circuit, right? There may be two different things, large scale integrated circuit as well as very large scale integrated circuit. Okay, so we have two more generation. I wanted to run a little quicker rather than my normal pace, but still I think I took enough time to explain, but doesn't matter, we learned something, that's good. Okay, so that's the sign up for today. We can take the remaining generations in the next class. Okay, so does anyone have any clarification or any question? No, right? So these are history. All you need to do is sit and remember these things. If you have any shortcut, it's better. I don't know any shortcuts are available for history, right? So it's enough. We will meet in another class. Okay, thank you.